What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Mailari. So I haven't done 2 days in a row here in the WZBC studio since I was an undergrad here at BC. So pretty exciting to do 2 days in a row. I was here last night talking some baseball, talking a lot about the Red Sox, and I touched on some other things as well. Juan Soto going to the Mets, the Yankees offseason. So right now, for this episode, I'm probably going to do a little more talking about the Red Sox, talk about some other things going on in the game of baseball, and then I'll move on to talk about the NBA for a few minutes. I'm not sure how much time I'll have on here, but probably around 25 minutes or so. So thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Hopefully you guys are all having a good one out there. So let's start off with the Red Sox, where I left off last night. I said I didn't have enough time last night to talk about Masataka Yoshida or Triston Casas and the trade rumors that have been around those two guys all offseason. So I'm going to start off with those two, and then we'll move on to some other things going on in the game of baseball. So let's start off with this. I'll start off with my general idea and my general opinion of the situation. I would not trade Yoshida. I would not trade Triston Casas. I wouldn't trade either player. People complain about Yoshida's contract, but honestly, he's been productive for the Red Sox in both seasons when he's been healthy. In 2023, a .289 batting average, tied for 13th in Major League Baseball. 2024, .280 batting average, so 9 points lower, tied for 25th in the game of baseball. In the last 75 games that he played in the 2024 season, which was June 24th to September 27th, Yoshida hit .303 for a batting average, 8 home runs, 44 runs batted in, and .828 OPS. The .303 batting average was 14th best in Major League Baseball over that stretch. So from June 24th to September 27th, he had the 14th best batting average in the game of baseball. A better batting average over that stretch than Shohei Ohtani, Julio Rodriguez, and Jose Altuve. And I know at the end of the day that batting average isn't everything. I know it's 2025 now, and baseball is not looked at by average home runs and RBIs anymore, really. You look at it through RBIs, home runs, and average. They all still are necessary to look at, but you look at some other stats as well. OPS is something that people look at a lot more. Hard hit rate, people look at a lot more. Ground ball percentage. You look at things a lot differently now than you did in 2014, let's say. And now, after the 2024 season ended, you're grading players a lot differently than you did back then, than 10 years ago. So obviously, batting average isn't the only thing that you can look at. But I think it does show his skill set. When you look at Masataka Yoshida, I still think he's the best bat-to-ball player on the Red Sox. He's the best pure contact hitter on the Red Sox. And his .303 batting average over that stretch of 75 games was 8th best in Major League Baseball. 14th best in Major League Baseball, I apologize, and then 8th best in the AL. 8th best in the American League. And 14th best overall in the MLB. Over that stretch, he also had a .369 on base percentage, which was 14th best in baseball. Once again, 8th in the AL. And then another stat I want to mention, his strikeout percentage. 12.2% was a strikeout percentage in that stretch. That's 10th best among qualified hitters in that stretch in the game of baseball. He also had a 132 weighted runs created plus, which was tied for 13th best in the AL. And also tied for 13th best in the AL, he had the 13th best OPS over that stretch in the American League. I wouldn't trade Masataka Yoshida. I think he's a very productive player, and I think he's the best pure hitter on the Red Sox. When it comes to getting the bat to the ball, I think he's the best in the Boston Red Sox lineup. People bring up his defense as an issue, that he only DHs, but if you can keep him at DH for the time being, why not do that? I wouldn't trade him just to trade him. A lot of people bring up the contract, and he makes, I think, around $18 million a year. But I think when Yoshida's healthy and he's in the lineup, he's a very valuable asset to have. I wouldn't trade him right now. I wouldn't. I would keep Masataka Yoshida in this lineup. I believe in him, and as I said, I think he's the best pure hitter on the Red Sox. I would not trade him. As for Triston Casas, the same goes for him. I wouldn't trade him either. I know a lot of people are looking to trade Casas, and a lot of people want to go out there and they want to get a big player on the market, whether it's, trading for a guy like Carlos Correa, which I saw a lot of Red Sox fans want the Red Sox to potentially do that. There were a lot of rumors that the Red Sox were going to go and trade for another pitcher at one point, and Casas could have been the guy they could move. Same thing with Yoshida potentially. But I wouldn't trade either guy. Triston Casas is only 24 years old. He turns 25 in just under 2 weeks. He's only 25 years old almost. And if you look at the 2023 season, that was a great year for him. A ton of progress, and then obviously he got hurt in 2024, and everyone forgot about his potential. And I know he was hurt at the end of 2023 as well. But in 2023, he hit 24 home runs, had a .263 batting average, an .856 OPS, and a .367 on base percentage. And in that season, he had the 9th best OBP, on base percentage, in the American League. In 2023, after the All-Star break, he played in 54 games. And this is back in 2023, as I mentioned. He had 15 home runs, 38 runs batted in, a .317 batting average, and a .1034 OPS. Over those 54 games, as I mentioned, he hit .317 for batting average, which this is from July 14th to September 14th of 2023. Over that 2-month stretch, .317 batting average, 10th best in Major League Baseball. He also had a .617 slugging percentage. That .617 slugging percentage was 6th best in baseball over that stretch, just behind Shohei Ohtani over that 2-month window. Also had a .1034 OPS, which was 7th best in the league. His isolated power, which that's a stat that takes your slugging percentage and subtracts the batting average from it. His isolated power was .300, which was 11th best in Major League Baseball. Ahead of Bryce Harper, ahead of Mookie Betts, ahead of Kyle Tucker over that stretch. Also had a .433 weighted on base average, which was tied for 7th in Major League Baseball over that 2-month stretch with Ronald Acuna Jr., who obviously was the MVP of baseball that year. So I think a lot of people are really not looking at Triston Casas and looking at his age and his potential. People just see the popular thing is to say, trade Triston Casas, and everybody wants the Red Sox to go out and do that. But the reality is, he has a lot of potential and a lot of room to grow. He really does. And I know he struggled in 2024 with injuries. Struggled the entire season for the most part, battling injuries. Finished with a .241 on base percentage, .241 batting average, an .800 OPS, and a .120 OPS plus, which is solid for a down year. But he only hit 13 home runs in that stretch of the 2024 season. So overall, 13 home runs, .241 batting average, not a great year for Casas, and I get that. But I would keep Casas and Yoshida. I think they're going to prove people wrong this season. And I think they're better players than they're getting credit for. They battled injuries this past season. You also have to factor in the fact that a lot of people just want to trade these guys just to trade them. It's a popular narrative to jump on, but for everyone that's listened to my podcast and listened to my radio show over the years, they know I give my honest opinions. Regardless of whether or not it's a popular thing to say, I say what I say because I feel the way I do about players or situations or teams. Even if it's not the popular thing to say. I stayed with Daniel Jones through all the ups and downs, and guess what? I'm still Daniel Jones' #1 advocate out there. Do I know he struggled? Do I know he should have played better? Do I expect more from him as the Giants quarterback when he was the quarterback? Yes, absolutely. I expected big things from Daniel Jones. But the reality of the situation is it didn't work out in New York, and that's fine. But that's not going to change my opinion of Daniel Jones and where I think he could be in respect to of the quarterbacks in the NFL if he was in the right situation. I think Daniel Jones could succeed in many systems in the NFL. Was New York the place for him? No, I mean, as I mentioned yesterday, 3 things against Daniel Jones that he can't control. Being drafted 6th overall, getting offered the contract he got offered, and then also playing in the New York market where there's so much pressure on you in that New York media market. So much pressure on you. So you can't blame Daniel Jones for that. And I compared Daniel Jones to Chaim Bloom yesterday. And I said, I think Chaim Bloom was the right guy for the Red Sox. I think Daniel Jones was the right guy for the New York Giants. But the reality of the situation is you can't control your surroundings a lot of the time. Chaim Bloom didn't have the okay to go out and spend major money. He had to have bargain contracts. But I think if the Red Sox let him spend even a little more than they did over that stretch when he was the Red Sox chief baseball officer from the end of the 2019 season to the end of the 2023 season, I think the Red Sox could have been in a much better situation if they just let Chaim Bloom spend. But the situation around Chaim Bloom was that he couldn't change his surroundings. Ownership didn't want to spend. And obviously there's a lot of pressure from the Boston market. Everyone on the radio, all the journalists, everyone calling for him to be fired. So Chaim Bloom can't control that at the end of the day. He can't, and that's not his fault. And the same goes for Daniel Jones. There's a lot of surroundings that Daniel Jones had to deal with, a lot of surrounding pieces around him in New York that were not his fault. The poor offensive line, a bottom 5 offensive line probably each and every year Daniel Jones was the quarterback of the Giants. I know the beginning of this year, the offensive line played a little better over the first, let's say, 4 or 5 games. And then things went really downhill after that Andrew Thomas injury. I think it was around like week 4 or week 5. The Giants' offensive line completely fell apart. And that's the thing. Daniel Jones can't be blamed for his surrounding pieces. Didn't get a wide receiver 1 until his last year in New York. Until his last year, the Giants drafted Malik Nabers in the first round. And that was it for Daniel Jones having a #1 wide receiver. So you can't blame him for that. Can't blame him for injuries around him. Can't blame him for the pressure from the New York media. There's just a lot around Daniel Jones that you couldn't blame him for. Andrew Thomas getting hurt in the 6th game of the season, you can't blame Daniel Jones for that. And the offensive line obviously took a major hit from that. So we'll see what happens with the future of Triston Casas and Masataka Yoshida. But as I said, I would keep Masa and I would keep Casas in Red Sox uniforms. I think they're both going to prove people wrong this upcoming season. And there's still a lot of good free agents out there. Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso, Anthony Santander. So we'll see what the Red Sox do. Those are 3 bats right there that the Red Sox could go out and get and maybe juice this lineup up and add some firepower. But I don't really know where the Red Sox go in free agency from here. Because I think a lot of people expected big moves. And obviously they did go out and get Garrett Crochet, which is a big move. I love the Walker Buehler signing, as I mentioned. I wasn't really too big of a fan of the Garrett Crochet trade, and mainly because I was not really happy with them moving on from Brady Montgomery. And prospects, at the end of the day, you never know if they're going to pan out. And that's why they're prospects. They're very unknown. But I feel like Garrett Crochet to some degree is an unknown as well, only being a starter for 1 year in Major League Baseball. And I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on that, and that's fine. We'll see how things work out. That's the beauty of sports a lot of the time. Everyone's going to have differing opinions, but once they get out there on the court, the ice, the field, you can see, whether or not your prediction or how you felt about a player was correct. And a lot of the time, it's tough to get it always right. Like every general manager that I mentioned. Every GM in every sport has makes and they have misses. That's just a reality of the sports industry. So we'll see what happens with Casas and Yoshida, but as I've mentioned, I would keep both of those guys in Red Sox uniforms. So now I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk about the NBA for a few minutes, which I know a big storyline around the NBA over the past probably month or so has been the NBA ratings falling. The NBA ratings, there was a report just about 2 weeks ago now, that NBA ratings are down 48% over the last dozen years. Over the last 12 years, NBA ratings are down 48%. And they're down 28% on ESPN this year alone. And some people might ask why. And I think a lot of people have different opinions about it, but I think a lot of things are tied together. I think there's a combination of things that you can look at. The first thing is the regular season seems too drawn out. It's too long to some degree. And that's something that I think the NBA should think about changing, maybe lowering the amount of regular season games there are. And at the end of the day, I love basketball. I love how many games there are every night. I love being able to tune in to a 10:30 game at night. At the end of the night, sometimes you just want to watch basketball. Obviously, baseball isn't on right now. There's no football games, let's say on Wednesday nights. So it's nice just to tune in to a basketball game. Last night, I watched the Sixers and the Warriors game. I love basketball. So if there's a game on, I'm going to tune in. I'm going to watch. So I'm not part of the percentage of people that have stopped watching the NBA. Even with the long regular season and obviously the emphasis on three-pointers in the NBA today, I still tune in and I still watch on a nightly basis. And that's because I love the game of basketball. But the reality of the situation is that the regular season, as I said, feels too long. And as a result, it's something that's not really taken serious by many teams and many players because of the opportunity to still compete for a playoff spot with the play-in tournament. You shouldn't be able to get into the NBA playoffs when you're 4 games under 500. You shouldn't be able to compete in the last couple weeks of the season. The reality of the situation of the NBA is letting 10 teams in each conference compete for a playoff spot means you have 20 of 30 teams competing to make the playoffs. That's 2/3 of the league. So that's just too many. That's just too many teams. The NBA needs to change something about that. Another thing is the emphasis on three-pointers. There are too many three-pointers taken every game. The league has abandoned the interior offense and to some degree has made the center position something that's all about shooting threes and providing spacing rather than working in the paint. There's no more really defensive and offensive anchors in the paint anymore. I know Rudy Gobert is a guy that is one of the big men in the NBA that really still can't shoot threes, but most big men in the NBA today can shoot threes. And that's why the NBA to some degree is a three-point contest every single night. And that's why it can be boring to watch because at the end of the day, it's really just grabbing the rebound, go shoot a three. The other team misses, picks it up, goes down the other end of the court, shoots a three. There's not really much ball movement, and if there is, it's really just to open up for a three-pointer. And I know a lot of people talk about how shooting threes is a lot more efficient than trying to go for 2-point shots. But I think that's why some fans have really gone away from the game of basketball because it's really just a 3-point shootout every single night. And it can be boring to watch at times, especially when teams are ice cold from three. Another thing is Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, LeBron James. The 3 best players of my generation are all approaching the end of their careers. So the NBA needs someone that they can build a future around, like Anthony Edwards, like Victor Wembanyama, like Luka Doncic, like John Morant. I haven't even been that big of a Luka Doncic fan over the last 4 or 5 years in the NBA. I think he's a really good player, especially if you look at his stats. But I've always said I don't really know if you're going to win a championship with Luka. Just the way he plays, and obviously the pace he works at. Who knows? But he did prove me wrong. Denver did go to the NBA Finals last year. And with Kyrie Irving, they have a very, very dynamic backcourt. So Luka Doncic is definitely a player the NBA can build around. And I know I've talked about it on the podcast before. I thought he was overrated at times. But he's still a very, very good talent. And somebody you can build the future of the league around potentially. But I think the main guy the NBA should build around, the main two I should say, Anthony Edwards and Victor Wembanyama. Victor Wembanyama is an absolute thrill to watch every single night. From the way he plays defense, from the way he can shoot, from the way he can move up and down the court at his height, 7'3", being able to shoot threes like that, grabbing rebounds, playing great defense, playing on a nightly basis. You can always count on Wemby to give you a thrilling game when you're watching him. It's always fun watching Victor Wembanyama play. So that's why I think Wemby is somebody the league can build around. Because he's very young, has a very, very bright future. And another thing is he tries to connect with the fans. There was a video over this past week when the Spurs were in New York. They played the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks. Victor Wembanyama met up with fans in Washington Square Park in Manhattan to play chess in the rain. And there was a great video and a great picture that came from that of Victor Wembanyama just hanging out with a lot of the fans that came to watch him play chess and some of the fans that even played against him. And that's a way you can grow the league. You're gaining fans through that. There might be a kid walking by that doesn't really care much about the game of basketball, but he looks to his left, he sees Victor Wembanyama, and someone says to him, oh yeah, that's the future of the NBA. And all of a sudden, that kid could potentially become a big fan of the NBA in the future. He'd become a fan of the NBA in the future. So Victor Wembanyama is definitely somebody the NBA can build around. And as I said, he's done great with trying to grow the game of basketball. If I was in Manhattan on that day and I was close enough to be able to go and see him, I definitely would have been there to meet him. I think that's an awesome thing that he did. I really do. So Wemby, a guy that we can build around. I think Anthony Edwards as well. I think Anthony Edwards has the ceiling to be one of the best players in the game of basketball when you look at the history books. Obviously, he's still very young, and there's a lot of still unknowns in the rest of his career, but I think pure talent, I think Anthony Edwards, the ceiling for him is being one of the best players of all time in the NBA. I really do. And we'll see how things work out. But I think pure talent, I think he definitely could be a top player in NBA history when it's all said and done, when his career's over with. And we'll see. There's still a lot left, so I know it's a really bold take. But I think Anthony Edwards is a guy you can build around the future of the league. Very, very talented. John Morant is another guy I mentioned. Very, very talented. Always has been a very talented player, but has battled injuries in his career and also off-the-court issues. But the NBA does have guys they can market around. Once Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and LeBron James are gone, and it's probably going to be within the next 2 or 3 years or so, the NBA is going to need somebody to build a future around. And that could be something they do to try to potentially grow the league and get it back on track. And as I mentioned about Wemby, he does an excellent job growing the game. He should be the guy, in my opinion, that the NBA builds a future around. He could be the future cover player of the NBA. And one thing I want to mention about Wemby is also he's from France. So you can get a lot of international players that, kids that are growing up playing high school basketball there to buy into the NBA and be fans of it. And the same goes all around the world, not just people from France, but in general. People are going to root for Victor Wembanyama because at the end of the day, he's growing the game of basketball in other places. People are tuning into NBA games just to see him. Even with the ratings being down, I'm sure the NBA ratings in some places across the world are going up because of Victor Wembanyama. And as I said, playing chess in Washington Square Park with fans in the rain shows he's not only one of the most dynamic players in the NBA, talent-wise. I mean, it doesn't really show what you're doing on the court when you're standing out there playing chess in the park, but it shows he's a human at the end of the day. He helps relate to fans better. So hopefully the NBA can find a way to build the future around Victor Wembanyama and some of those other guys I mentioned. And there's probably some guys I'm missing there. But the league could definitely build around some guys to try to grow it for the future. And how can the league fix things? Well, one they already mentioned was potentially marketing around some of those young pieces that are going to be the future of the league. And I think another thing is, I know the league tried to start the in-season tournament over the last few years to try to build interest, but it really didn't interest me much at all over the last few years. It really didn't. I think it was a nice idea to try to spice things up, but in reality, The only tournament that matters is the playoffs when you're competing for an NBA Finals. The in-season tournament doesn't really matter too much. Having a banner in your arena that says in-season tournament 2024 champs doesn't really thread the needle too much for me. Everybody wants to win the NBA Finals. And I know the league tried to spice things up, but I wasn't really too big of a fan of the tournament. I thought it was a little bit forced, and I also thought the courts being, different colors, I thought it was a little bit hard to pay attention. It was a little difficult to pay attention and watch a game. So I think that's one thing the league can do. Maybe potentially think about changing that or maybe getting rid of it. And like I already mentioned, the play-in tournament. 20 teams should not qualify for the playoffs, with 4 of those being in the play-in tournament on each side. So essentially, there are 8 teams in each conference. 4 teams in each conference and 8 teams overall that play in the play-in tournament at the start of the playoffs. And I know it ends up being 16 teams making the playoffs, which is just over 50% of the league. But you shouldn't have 66.66% of the league competing between the playoffs and the play-in tournament. With only 5 teams from each conference being eliminated before the play-in tournament, it causes teams to just take the regular season less serious, like Milwaukee did last year, like the Sixers did for most of the beginning of this season. But now if you look at the Sixers and how they've played over the last few weeks, after a terrible start to the season, they started the year 3-14, and they're still in the wild card race. Well, I said wild card, but it's really just a play-in tournament race, and still have a chance to make the playoffs through the play-in tournament. Right now where they stand, they're 13-19. So 3-14 start means they were 10-5 over the last 15 games, at one point winning 4 games in a row, but now they've lost 2 in a row. But they've won 10 of the last 15 games. And right now where they stand, they're only 1 game out of the 10th seed in the East to make the play-in tournament. The regular season just has little to no impact. It's just not taken serious. The NBA needs to go back to 8 teams in each conference making the playoffs. Another thing is shortening the regular season to maybe 72 games. Potentially there would be less load management, and maybe more players would be fresh and healthy for the playoffs. I don't know how the NBA can address the style of basketball and the way it's being played, obviously with there being just a huge emphasis on shooting threes, but defense has definitely taken a back seat in exchange for faster-paced play in order to try to get more possessions and more chances at shooting threes. With these extra creative possessions, teams are taking more and more threes because of the greater efficiency that comes with shooting a three than taking a 2-point shot, and that's because of analytics. In the 2013-2014 NBA season, the NBA averaged 7.7 three-pointers made per team per game. So the average NBA team back in the 2013-2014 season averaged 7.7 three-pointers made per game, with 21.1 three-point attempts per team per game. And also the league average in scoring was 101 points per game in that season. Fast forward to the 2024-2025 NBA season, and this stat that I pulled on my own probably about 2 weeks ago, so it's probably a little bit different now, but probably not by too much. In the 2024-2025 NBA season, NBA teams are averaging 13.5 three-pointers made per game, with 37.5 three-point attempts per contest, and a 113 point per game average per team. So not only are the three-pointers made up now in the NBA from 7.7 just about 10 years ago to now 13.5 per game, and this is each team basically being able to shoot a lot more, and now they're making double the amount of threes they made 10 years ago. They're also attempting many more threes as well, from 21 three-point attempts per game back in 2013-2014 to now 37.5 per contest. And that's why the point per game average is up in the NBA from 101, now we're at 113. So there's definitely a lot of change in the NBA and the way the style of basketball is being played. And I'm not really too sure how the NBA can fix that, but that's definitely a reason people have fallen off from the NBA, because it's really just a three-point shootout. And these stats here from the 2024-2025 season, I probably gathered these probably around 2 weeks ago, so maybe things are a little bit different now, but probably not by too much. I'd imagine things are still pretty similar, and it's not going to be anywhere close in makes per game and attempts per game, per team, whether or not it's been 2 weeks since that date that I pulled those stats. It's not going to change too much. Teams are still shooting many more threes and making many more threes than they did back in the 2013-2014 season. And there's another thing I want to mention is the NBA All-Star Weekend. That's a mess. Kevin Durant's right. Making it a tournament is not the best idea. The league said just about 2 weeks ago now that they're going to have all 24 All-Stars in the 2025 NBA All-Star Game split up into 3 teams of 8 players, and there's going to be a 4th team that plays against them. Whichever team wins the Rising Stars Challenge is going to be the 4th team in the tournament, and there's going to be a mini tournament with the 3 NBA All-Star teams and the Rising Stars Championship team, whatever team wins the Rising Stars tournament, and they're going to go at it in a mini tournament. I think the NBA is missing something here, and I know at the end of the day people want more competition in the NBA All-Star Game, and I completely agree. You want to see them at least care a little bit. But I don't think necessarily doing a tournament is going to make it any better. And I'm not sure how you can make it better by playing it 5-on-5, with 7 or 8 reserves on the bench. I'm not really too sure. But I know what the NFL did about in the last, 5 years or so, when they just completely wiped away the Pro Bowl and made it into something that's fun watching by making it a Pro Bowl games rather than it being a tackle football game where guys really aren't blocking, guys aren't really caring. The NFL looked at that and they changed it and turned it into a Pro Bowl games. And it ends up being something that's a lot more exciting. Flag football games, so nobody's getting hurt. The risk of injury is still there. You can still always get hurt playing flag football, but it's a lot lower than it is when you play tackle football. And guys can care a little bit more in flag football and not worry about getting hit and concussions and stuff like that. The NBA probably has to do something similar. Change the way they play the All-Star Game and make things a little interesting. And I'm not really too sure how the tournament format's going to look. I'm still going to give it a shot. I'm not going to say that it's completely a horrible idea right now, but I don't think it's going to really necessarily make it much better, but we'll see. And Christmas Day used to be the NBA's day. And even though this year there were so many fun games to watch, and I watched all 5 games, and I probably only watched a few minutes of the football games, switching from Netflix to TV during commercials was just too much work. It was too much work, and I think there's something that needs to be done there to make streaming more accessible, so when there is a commercial during the game and you leave the app on your TV, you're not taking 3 minutes to get back into the game. There needs to be something that makes it a little bit more fluid and easier to change channels. But the NFL games on Christmas Day, they weren't really even that great of games. The Chiefs beat the Steelers 29-10, and the Ravens beat the Texans 31-2. And still somehow, some way, the NFL had around 24 million viewers in each of those 2 games. The NFL had 24 million viewers in each of those 2 games. But you look at the NBA viewers, and there weren't that many. There weren't that many. And that's the thing. The NBA, which even though I still watched all 5 games, the reality is when there's an NFL game, the NBA has to be worried because they know people are going to tune in probably more to watch the NFL than they're going to watch those NBA games. And even with those NFL games being not really great outcomes, not really great matchups at the end of the day when you look at the final score, the NFL averaged 24.2 million viewers in those 2 games they played. The NBA only averaged 5.25 million viewers in those 5 games on Christmas Day. So the viewership was much higher in those NFL games than those NBA games. Nearly 5 times as many people watched those NFL games on average than those NBA games on average. Overall, the Chiefs-Steelers game had 24.1 million viewers on Netflix. The Ravens-Texans had 24.3 million viewers on Netflix. And then the NBA games. The Knicks-Spurs had 4.9 million. The Celtics-76ers had 5.1 million. The Timberwolves-Mavericks had 4.3 million. The Lakers-Warriors had 7.7 million. And the Nuggets-Suns, which was the last game of the night, had 3.8 million. So those numbers were very, very far away from each other. And Christmas Day was always the NBA's game. And I know that's what LeBron James said. He said he loves the NFL, but Christmas Day is the NBA's. And the reality is the NBA definitely had a better product in those games. There's a better product to watch on TV in each of those 5 games than those 2 NFL games were in that day. In the NFL games, there were 2 good teams going at it. 2 good records on each side of each of those 2 games. But the outcome obviously ended up being a blowout. The NBA games were a lot closer. But still, even with that being said, the NBA games just got blown out of the water by those NFL games. The NBA games just couldn't compete when it came to average viewership than those NFL games, obviously were able to collect in that day. So we'll see what happens with the NBA in the future on Christmas Day. And I think they did all they could, the NBA. The game was easy to watch on TV, and they were all down to the wire for the most part, great matchups. But the NBA was still really far away from the NFL when it came to average viewers on that day. And I think the game of basketball needs to do better at trying to grow. I think a lot of people look at, as I said, those guys I mentioned, Wemby, Luka, as potential guys you can build the future around. And obviously those two guys definitely are people you can build around. But I think it starts from the top up. The top of the NBA, whether it's owners, executives, the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, they all have to make the game something that people want to tune in and they want to watch. And you can't blame Adam Silver for the way the game of basketball is played now with just the huge emphasis on threes. But there's something that needs to be done to make the game easier to watch, figuratively and literally. The game needs to be easier to watch on both accounts. I think people want to watch better matchups and not having a three-point contest. But you also want to be able to tune in from anywhere you are. Make it accessible for more and more fans across the world. And I know they've tried to do that with different things like League Pass and stuff like that. But I think there's still more work that needs to be done. Maybe lowering prices to make people try to tune in more. I know the NBA is still going to make a lot of money no matter what off their TV deals. It's a very lucrative business, the business of sports. It is. But you still, if ratings are going down, you still want to find a way to try to get people to come back to watch the game of basketball. And I think Mat Ishbia, the owner of the Phoenix Suns, is doing great with that. He's rewriting what it is all about being an NBA owner. Not only did he make the broadcast of Suns games free for fans in Phoenix over the past year, but he also sent TV antennas to fans who could not afford to watch the game because they didn't have a television at home. He sent TV antennas to fans. This shows how much he values fans, something that's important to do. Fans want to feel valued, just like I always try to do with my season ticket holders at BC. You want them to feel valued. They're giving up their precious time, their time away from work, their leisure time. They are giving up, and also money, time, energy, giving up days to come and watch your team play. Giving up time in their day, in their schedule, to try to make time to watch you play. And that's what Mat Ishbia is doing. He's trying to make it easier for people that want to watch the Suns play, and also wants to make it easier for people that are going to Suns games. One thing he just did was he changed the entire menu at Phoenix Suns games. And that's one thing I want to mention here. This is probably my last segment here before I go. But what he did was he made a $2 menu for concessions at all Suns home games for the rest of the season. And this is what he tweeted. Winning starts with our fans. When I walk the concourse at games, there aren't food options for families who don't want to spend a lot of money. That needs to change. So today we're rolling out a $2 value menu for all Suns home games. A family of four used to spend $98 on hot dogs /water /popcorn. Now they can enjoy the same meal for $24. Our fans and community are the foundation of what we do, and we will continue to invest in making this the best organization in all of basketball on and off the court. And now you look at it, they have the most affordable, fan-friendly menu in the NBA. A hot dog used to be $9 at Suns games. Now they're down 77% in price. $2 left is what they are now. So they're $2, so $7 less than they were back then. A 16-ounce water was $8.50, a 77% price reduction. A fountain soda, 16-ounce, was $6.50 before. Now it's $2. A bag of chips was $7 at one point. Now it's $2. A bag of popcorn was $7 at one point. Now it's $2. He really values the fans. And I think that's what the NBA needs to do. You need to make fans feel valued. That's what Victor Wembanyama did. By going out to Washington Square Park and tweeting, does anybody want to come play me on the southeast corner at Washington Square Park? And he put the coordinates of where he was at, and people went and they played with them, and they met him, and they took pictures. That's a way you grow the game of basketball. Mat Ishbia sees that as well. He's changing what it is all about when it comes to being an NBA owner. By valuing the fans and not seeing it just as a way to make money. I think the way we look at sports a lot of time is a revenue thing. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to grow and cultivate and keep those relationships for a very long time with your fans. Whether they're season ticket holders, single game attendance, whatever it may be. You want to still make people want to come back for another game. Whether they're watching it on TV or they're going to the game and they're going to your arena and they're watching you play. You want to be able to make the product something that people want to see, but you want to make it accessible for them as well. And that's what Mat Ishbia is doing. Not only making it more accessible when it comes to sending them TV antennas, but also when you're at the game. You can go there and still eat at the game and not give up $100 for a family of four. Rather than that, you're giving up only about $24. And that's for the rest of all of the season at Suns home games. They're going to have those $2 prices on each of those things I mentioned, which is great. The NBA needs to find a way to still grow that game of basketball. And there's still so much young talent in the NBA. They have so many guys that can grow around. There are a lot of teams on the rise in the NBA. The Houston Rockets, Oklahoma City Thunder. But the NBA still is seeing a decline when it comes to viewership. And I think the style of basketball is one thing. The amount of teams making the playoffs is one thing, which I'm talking about the play-in tournament. I don't think 10 teams should make it on each side, when it comes to the playoffs and the play-in tournament. And the same thing goes for 72, or I should say 82 regular season games. I think that should lessen to about 72. So the NBA definitely has a lot of work to do when it comes to getting people back to buy into the game and watch again. But I don't think they're necessarily in a horrible spot. They're in a tough spot right now, but I wouldn't say it's the worst. They can still figure things out. There's still so much young talent that they can build around. And there's still ways they can go about making the game more accessible and valuing fans more. That's what Mat Ishbia is doing. That's what Victor Wembanyama did. You want to make fans feel valued for their time, for their money, for their energy, for freeing up their schedule to try to go and see you play. You want to make it more accessible and value them more. So see what happens with the future of the NBA. As I said, I'm still going to tune into NBA games no matter what. Even with it being a three-point contest, I still tune into games because I love the game of basketball. And obviously when Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron James, Jimmy Butler, all these guys retire, the NBA is going to look a lot different. And that's one guy I want to mention really quick is Jimmy Butler. He's on his way out of Miami. I don't really have a trade package here that I can break down for you guys. I did make a few that I want to mention about Zach LaVine, but didn't really have the minute here. I do have to go back to work, so I won't have the minute here to break down some of those trades that I had written up for Zach LaVine. But Jimmy Butler's on his way out of Miami. Said yesterday he's fine playing anywhere else but Miami, and that a reporter asked him, do you feel like you can get your joy back playing for the Miami Heat? And he said probably not. So he requested a trade out of Miami. Not really too surprising. He's upset with the way Miami's really handled the last 2 or 3 seasons, not really adding too many pieces around him to try to win right now. And Jimmy's obviously given that franchise everything he could over the last 5 years. From making the NBA Finals twice to he also played through injuries at one point. Jimmy Butler gave Miami everything he could. So it's not really too much of a surprise that he wants out of Miami after they didn't end up going out and getting too much talent next to him to try to go out and win right now. And I always felt like Miami would be a lot better if they just went out and got a legitimate power forward to put in that starting lineup. Or a center. Whether or not Bam Adebayo would be the power forward of the center, he's probably more of a center. So if you could go out and get a legitimate power forward threat and add that next to Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero and Terry Rozier, and obviously Jaime Jaquez Jr., they have some young talent there as well in Miami. Nikola Jovic being one of them. I think the Miami Heat could be a much bigger threat if they went out and they got a legitimate power forward. And maybe a fix could be going or trading for a guy like John Collins, who's on the cheapest side when it comes to trade value. Utah's probably rebuilding, obviously, and they'll probably move on from him pretty easily considering he has a big contract. So I don't know if he'd be necessarily the main piece that Miami needs, but they need to go out and they need to try to find a guy that they can fit in that lineup. And that's if they're keeping Jimmy Butler. If Jimmy Butler ends up leaving, which it seems like it's more than likely that he ends up leaving. If Jimmy Butler ends up leaving, it wouldn't make sense to go out and get a power forward. They're probably in a rebuilding moment for at least the rest of the season if they go and trade Jimmy Butler. They're not going to go out and they're going to trade Jimmy and try to get a piece to win right now. That's at least just the way I feel about things right now. But we'll see. Anyways, I do have to run back to work, so that's going to conclude this episode. But thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure being back in the WZBC studio. Hopefully I can do this more, and definitely I want to broadcast it more to people, people that have listened to my podcast and my radio show over the last few years. I definitely want to put out a link on there so you guys can listen to this a little bit, a little bit easier than just listening on Spotify. I love doing live episodes, and this is obviously live right now, but you don't really send the link to too many people just since it's once again, another unexpected episode like last night was. So I didn't want to send it out to too many people since I know it's a busy time during the workday right now. So, I figured, a lot of people have a lot going on. But I definitely want to get a set time where I can do this at least on a bi-weekly basis, or maybe once every, few, 3, 4, 5 weeks, whatever it may be. I definitely want to figure this out, in a better time window so people can tune in, whether it's a set time or, I post something on my Instagram story and say, hey, tune in at this time. I definitely want to make this a little bit easier for people to tune in. So, thank you guys so much for listening. It is much appreciated. I wish you guys all the best. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys hopefully back here soon in the WZBC studio. Go Eagles.